Yeah, thank you so much. Thank you. And assalamu alaikum and a very warm welcome to everyone, our participants, our distinguished speakers and the organizers. My name is Lopa Rahman and I manage ESG advisory programs for South Asia for IFC. And I'm very pleased and honored to be organizing this program as part of our ESG Bangladesh project, which is supported by the Swiss Embassy under the State Secretariat for Economic Cooperation, SECO of Swiss. We are very pleased to have them support our ESG Bangladesh program. So this training is organized under our partnership that we have established with our central bank, and they're very supportive, extremely cooperative partner in this exercise. So we're very happy and pleased to be able to organize this program together with the Central Bank of Bangladesh, Bangladesh Bank. So we have another day tomorrow, and then hopefully everyone who's joined the program today will be certified. And our objective doesn't end here today. The objective of this training is ultimately it'll lead to developing sustainability reporting guidelines, which will be issued by the central bank, and we'll be supporting them in that particular activity as well. So with that, I'd pass over to Chaudhry Liaquat, sir. If you'd like to say a few words, and then the director. Thank you.
Sorry, you're on mute. We just need you to unmute there. There we go. Great. Thanks.
Thank you, Lupa. Distinguished consultant Ms. Tipani and Lupa Rahman and my colleagues, those who are the participants in the working day. Welcome to all for 2 days training and capacity building program on TCFD training for banks part 1 governance and strategy, and TCFD trainings for banks part 2 managing risks and setting targets. It is with great pleasure and a sense of responsibility that I welcome you all to this crucial training program on the task force on climate-related financial disclosure. Today, I embarked on a journey that holds the potential to shape the future of finance and environmental stewardship. The TCFD training program comes at a time when climate change has become an undeniable reality affecting economics and the business and communities worldwide. As the effects of climate change continue to intensify, the importance of understanding and managing climate-related risks and opportunities cannot be overstated. I believe that the training program is designed to equip our Bangladesh Bank officials with the knowledge and tools to navigate the complexities of climate-related financial disclosure effectively. By providing a comprehensive understanding of the TCFD frameworks, we aim to empower BB officials to lead towards a more sustainable and resilient future. Through this training, we will delve into 4 core elements of the TCFD recommendations: governance, strategy, risk management, and metrics and targets. By exploring these areas, participants will gain insights into the integrations of the climate considerations, which can help for decision-making process, financial reporting, and long-term strategies. Moreover, this program will foster a collaborative environment where you can engage with industry experts and fellow participants, share experience, and exchange best practices. I believe that learning from each other's experience is essential in driving meaningful changes and building a collective momentum towards climate actions. As we invest our time and energy into this training, let us remember that our efforts extend beyond the boardroom and financial statements. This holds the potential to impact the health of our planet and the well-being of future generations. By adopting the TCFD framework, we are not only demonstrating transparency and accountability, but also contributing to more sustainable and prosperous world. I encourage all of the participants to embrace this training with open mind and a commitment to bring out positive changes. The journey towards climate resilient financial practices may not be easy, but together we can make difference. I would like to extend my gratitude to IFC, especially Ms. Lupa Roman, facilitators Tiffany and his associates, and others for organizing this insightful capacity building program and providing us with this platform and to share. I also thank you, our development partner GIZ, for supporting the logistics and port and so, because all of the participants, we sit together in our conference room, and let us embark on this transformative endeavor with enthusiasm and shared visions of sustainable future. Now, I go to declare the inaugurations of the training program. Thank you very much. And
Thank you so much.
Start.
Yes.
Let us start Tiffany to her presentation. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Over to you, Tiffany.
Great. Thanks to both of you for the great opening remarks and for really setting the scene for why we're all here today. And that is, of course, the training on task force on climate-related financial disclosures. And really what we're trying to understand here is the financial impact that climate can have on all of the organizations in your economy, but also that you interact with in your networks. So we're a group of experts here today to help you through this. Myself and Vanina come from the Sustainable Stock Exchanges Initiative. And then we're also joined with 3 experts from the UN Environment Program's Finance Initiative, which has a specific program, TCFD, for banks, and they all work in various areas of that program. So we'll be here with you today and tomorrow facilitating this training. Before we get started, just a few housekeeping issues. I'm going to put you guys on mute over there for now. So please, if you'd like to communicate with us, do unmute yourselves. We normally hold this training on Zoom where you can, type in the chat or you can ask us any questions in the Q&A. However, because the majority of you are in the training room where you can't communicate directly with us through the Zoom platform, we've just asked a representative at the central bank to be in charge of communicating with us. So hi, everyone. We can see you now. Thanks for joining us. If you have any questions or comments throughout the training, you can go ahead and type them. You can come up to the computer and type them in the chat or in the Q&A. Also, we hopefully will have time for questions at the end. We are also going to hold some kind of polls and quizzes throughout the training. And since you can't fill that out through the Zoom platform, what we'll ask you to do is to raise your hand. So we'll give maybe, for example, 4 options. So you'd put a 1 for option 1, a 2 for option 2, 3 and 4, and so on. And then we'll ask a representative in the room to let us know what the majority of you have selected. So that's how we'll be interacting with you. And at the end, in the second half of today's training, we will have an exercise that we'll do collectively. And what we use is a platform called Mentimeter. So there's 2 ways to access that. You can either use your mobile device and go to a browser and type in www.menti.com, and we'll provide you the code to enter, and that'll help you to interact with us. Or we'll put on a QR code on the screen, and if you use your phone and point it at it with your camera, it'll allow you to open directly to the interactive platform. So for this second half, we just ask that you have a mobile device available so that we can interact using Menti. Another few items, we will take a short 5-minute break halfway through. It's just 5 minutes, so we just ask that you please keep it to that 5 minutes and return promptly, because we have a lot of content to cover today and we're already a little bit behind. And also all this presentation, the full PowerPoint will be shared with you. We share it in the chat, but also I believe it'll be emailed out to you from the organizers as well. So you will have all of these slides available. And then to get your certificate of completion, we will ask you to fill in a short feedback survey at the end. So we'll share a link with you. Again, we'll put that in the chat, but also we'll have the organizers email it to you. And we require you to just fill in a short feedback survey. And if you complete that, we will then give you a certificate of completion for this course. So here's what we're looking to cover today. As I get started, I just want to make sure, can everybody hear me okay in that room? Is it clear and understandable? Maybe just a thumbs up. Yes, okay, great. So today's agenda, what we're looking to cover is, first we want to introduce what is the TCFD and how can it be helpful to you. I think you already have an idea, so we'll highlight really the key points of it that we hope that you take away from our training, and how that fits within the broader climate reporting landscape. That's going to take us through the first half of today's session. Then in the second half today, we're going to go into the first two pillars of the TCFD, which is governance and strategies. And since a huge portion of that strategy component is really looking at scenario analyses, we will then do an exercise together looking at how to conduct a scenario analysis and what exactly an analysis of these scenarios is. Before we end today, we will provide you with a number of additional resources, and if we have time, we'll do Q&A at the end. Hopefully we do have time. If not, we'll ask you to email your questions to us afterwards. So our learning objectives today are, first and foremost, we hope to help you understand the key elements of climate-related financial disclosures that are recommended by the TCFD and why it's relevant in particular to the banking sector. We'll also help you to identify how climate can be integrated into governance and what role appropriate climate governance plays in organizational resilience. We also look to help you understand how banks can strategically respond to climate-related risks and opportunities. And finally, understand how to use a scenario analysis as a tool for climate resilience. So with that, let's try our first poll here. We would like to get an idea of your current level. Are you an expert? Are you confident, but you're here for an update? Do you have limited knowledge, or do you have little to prior knowledge? So if you just each raise your hand and put 1 if you're an expert, 2 if you're confident and you're here for an update, 3 if you have limited knowledge, and 4 if you have no prior knowledge of TCFD. If you can each raise your hand and give me a number, and then maybe I'll ask one of the representatives to let us know what the majority of the room is at. If you're trying to speak, I can't hear you. Oh, 3 we see in the chat. Okay, well, I didn't get that. So maybe these polls aren't going to work. So we might just skip the polls from here on. But when we do get to these slides, do have a think about what the answers are, because some of them are meant to make you reflect a little bit on the session. So I see that in the chat box, we do have those of you who've joined online. A lot of you have limited knowledge. So I'm not quite sure where all of you are at in the room. Hopefully you at least know what TCFD stands for. If not, it's Task Force on Climate-Related Financial Disclosures. And if anything's unclear, please ask us. Oh, I hear you now.
The microphone is on.
Did you want to share with us what the number in the room is?
We are 10 participants in the room.
Okay, great. And would you say you're more or less experts on TCFD, confident? Do you have limited knowledge, or do you have little to no prior knowledge?
Some of them are in the 3rd category, 3.
3, okay, great, wonderful. Okay, so we can manage the polls then. Let's get started on what is TCFD, and let's already get that knowledge level moving forward. So to get started, just a short overview of what are the TCFD's recommended disclosures, and to ensure that you're all crystal clear on the roles that these recommendations have in making it in that connection between climate and finance. So really keeping in mind that that's the objective of the TCFD, is to connect both climate and finance. So we are in the first session of this, and we have 2 sessions just for everyone to know. If you do need a recap of any of this, or if you feel like you need additional details, you can go to our YouTube video, and we have additional training on introductory to TCFD, which might be helpful as well. Great. So here's a few just intro pieces for making that connection between climate and finance. So if you look at the first, the quote on the left-hand side of the screen, which is from a CEO of BlackRock, the investment community, we see here that there has been, and this quote is quite old now, I think it's from 2015, that when millions of people took to the street to demand action on climate change, what many of them emphasized was the significant and lasting impact that it will have on economic growth and prosperity. So the investment community is really waking up to the idea that climate really does have a significant impact on economic growth and prosperity. But then we're also seeing it linked directly to businesses. So as you'll see on the right-hand side of this slide, we have the top global risks by likelihood from the World Economic Forum's risk report. And this is from their latest report. And every square that's in green is a climate-related risk. So as you can see, since 2019, the top 3 risks have all been climate-related. So in 2023, the risks identified were the first one being failure to mitigate climate change, the second one being failure to adapt to climate change, and then the final one being natural disasters and extreme weather events. Now, what's interesting about these top 3 risks we're seeing for businesses is they actually align quite perfectly with the TCFD's risk categories, which we'll talk about later, are transition risks. So our transition to a low carbon economy. And that really has to do with how do we mitigate and how do we adapt. So those first 2 risks. And then also physical risks related to climate change, which really aligns perfectly with that third top risk, which is natural disasters and extreme weather events. So the reason that investors are expressing the need for more information from companies on climate and their risk management is because our current financial system does not appropriately consider the risks pertaining to climate change because of the time horizons that we're using. So as you can see from this quote from Mark Carney, who is the UN Special Envoy on Climate Action and Finance, but when he said this particular quote, he was the governor of the Bank of England. And he said here, the horizon of monetary policy extends out 2 to 3 years. And for financial stability, it's a little bit longer, but typically only to the outer boundaries of the credit cycle, about a decade. And climate change becomes a defining issue for financial stability much further down, at which point it's already too late to act. So in simplified terms, what it means is that the actions we take today on climate change have an impact quite far in the future. So they've not been integrated into our typical financial cycles. So this quote is already 8 years old, and that was kind of the start of the TCFD. It was this recognition that we really need to readjust our timing cycles and understand today the impacts that climate will have and our decisions related to climate will have in the future. So what are these risks, these financial impacts that we're talking about? Well, luckily, the TCFD does give a lot of guidance on how to understand what the financial impact of climate may be on your organization. And now, if we just start here with the financial impact of climate-related risks, TCFD provides a categorization of risks that a number of organizations are now using themselves. And it recommends also that organizations should, at a minimum, review these particular risk categories. So you can see on the left-hand side here, we have, as I mentioned, transition risks and physical risks. And then of the transition risks, we have 4 categories of risks. We have policy and legal, technology, market, and reputation risks. And then for physical risks, we have acute and chronic risks. Now, how these then impact our organization is we can see them impact either in our financial performance as an organization, so impacting our revenues, our costs, maybe our cost of goods sold, our cash flow, our impairment charges, losses, etc. And they can also impact our financial position, so our carrying amount of assets, our portfolio value, liability, and equity. Now, the objective of the TCFD is really making that connection between the 2 sides of the slide. So we want to understand what are the risks and opportunities facing our own organization as well as the other organizations in our portfolio, but not just understanding the risks, understanding how that impacts us financially. So that's really where the TCFD can help organizations to move forward with this. So just to give you a few examples here, so if we're looking at policy risks, this includes implementing carbon pricing mechanisms to reduce national greenhouse gas emissions in a country, or a shifting of energy use towards low emission sources. Also, we might see happening the adoption of energy efficiency solutions and encouraging greater water efficiency. So what we want to do is understand how then that impacts our organization financially. So, for example, if we have new energy efficiency solutions being promoted by the government, that might decrease our costs because we can get energy at a lower cost than we were before. But we might also see an increase in costs, for example, if it has to do with carbon pricing or greenhouse gas emissions schemes. So understanding that line from one side to the next is the objective of TCFD. When we're talking about technology risks, we're looking at the development and use of emerging technologies such as renewable energy, maybe battery storage, energy efficiency, carbon capture and storage, etc. And this can often then impact the competitiveness of an organization with reputational risks. This is tied to customers or community perception of an organization and their contribution to, or maybe even detraction from, the transition to a lower carbon economy. And then when we're talking about physical risks, what we really want to understand is exactly what is happening that will physically impact usually our assets or our supply chain or our ability to conduct business. So acute risks are physical risks that are event driven, such as increased severity of extreme weather events like cyclones and hurricanes or floods. We often see those in the news, and we can see how those obviously impact organizations, such as disrupting their supply chain, making it impossible to source certain resources, making it impossible to get the end product to a consumer, maybe impacting physical assets and impairing those, that sort of thing. We also have chronic physical risks, however, which are physical risks that are more longer term and they compound over time. They pertain to shifts in climate patterns. Examples of chronic risks include sustained high temperatures. That may cause things like sea level rises or chronic heat waves over time, and that also can have a sustained impact on our organizations. So really the key thing here is to understand how those risks then impact an organization financially, and that's the objective of the TCFD. Now, we talked a lot about financial risks, but what about the opportunities? And I don't want to take the opportunities lightly here, even though we will talk a lot about risks. But this graph here helps to bring into focus that the opportunities can actually have an even greater financial impact than the risks. And this is a CDP 2019 report, and it provides details of an analysis of 500 of the world's biggest companies by market capitalization, and it provided estimations of the potential financial implications for a proportion of their reported risks and opportunities related to climate. And CDP found that just under $1 trillion USD, so it was actually 970 billion, were at risk due to climate events. However, those same companies identified opportunities in around the 2.1 trillion mark. So 2.1 times bigger were the opportunities and the dollar amount of the opportunities related to climate. So even though TCFD is really looked at from a risk perspective often, we want to make sure that it's also understood that there's a huge amount of impact related to the opportunities as well. And of course, missing those opportunities if you're not making use of guidance such as the TCFD. So what are those opportunities? Here's the opportunities that the TCFD has identified. And just like with risks, it set out a set of categories. And these include resource efficiency, which is often related to cost savings from reduced operating costs or by improving efficiency. And it might include, for example, more efficient transportation, using recycled goods, enhancing efficiency of buildings, or reducing water consumption, which then resource efficiencies can then lead to, for example, lowering our costs. It might also impact fewer losses. If we're investing in companies that are focused on resource efficiency, then we can also see a shift in our portfolio value and a more resilient portfolio as well. The second category here of opportunities is energy source opportunities. And this could include looking, for example, at low emission alternatives such as wind or solar or tidal or hydro, et cetera. And the latest data really shows us that this is the direction we need to move in. So it's an opportunity that we're soon to lose because we need to catch on that really quickly. Also, we see here that there's a category on products and services, which includes development of low emission goods and services, adaptation solutions, innovation, diversification of offerings, and also consumer preferences. And some other opportunities we see are market opportunities, which involves proactively seeking opportunities in markets of types of assets that may be available to diversify activities to better position a company. So this is particularly interesting for banks, for the banking sector, which are finding a number of opportunities through underwriting or financing green bonds and interest structures, for example, in a low emission energy product or energy efficiency grid connectivity or transport networks, et cetera. And then the final area is resilience. So resilience is something we'll talk about a lot over these 2 days because it's really the objective of the TCFD is to make more resilient companies. The reason investors want this information is because they want to be sure that the companies they're investing in are resilient, that they will survive the test of time, that when everything changes around them, when the climate changes, when the physical impacts of climate change come, when policies change, when consumer preferences change, that the company is going to be prepared for those changes. So resilience is really a key opportunity of the TCFD. Great. Now I'm going to skip this poll because it was a little bit difficult to do our poll and we're short on time, but you will have this in the handout we'll share. And so just have a reflection of what are examples of climate or financial impacts from climate that a bank might want to look through. And just to note that revenue growth from increased sustainable financing is indeed an opportunity from increased sustainable finance. And this could be access, for example, from new markets like green bonds. Also, the second option is also an opportunity that, through talent acquisition. Impact on talent acquisition due to the perception that your bank is not accurately addressing climate-related issues can be a risk, which of course you can turn to an opportunity by ensuring that you're communicating well how you're addressing these risks and opportunities. The third one is on fines and judgments. So these come from climate-related regulation, and indeed that can also hit your balance sheet since you'll have to pay those fines and that litigation. So that might lead.
May I interrupt you?
Sure.
Just a minute. What do you mean by talent acquisition?
So your hiring process. So one of the risks that we were talking about, if I just go back a few slides here, whoops, too far, was of course your reputational risk and your market risk. So if you're not communicating your alignment with the TCFD, if you're not communicating to markets your plan for adapting and mitigating climate-related risks and opportunities, you might struggle, especially with the newer generations, to hire talent, because increasingly people are requiring the companies they work for to be more climate conscious. So that can have a real impact on your hiring processes. Is that clear? Great. And then finally, increased competitiveness or increased competitive positioning as a result of change in consumer preferences. That's very similar to what we were just talking about with the talent acquisition. Here also, your consumers will be also following what you're doing, and increasingly we're seeing consumer demand for climate alignment. So all of those were actually impacts from climate that a bank should report. I'm going to skip over this slide and let you review it in your own time because we're quite far behind on time, and I think this is quite self-explanatory, but just to note, there are a number of benefits beyond risk mitigation in aligning your disclosure with the TCFD's recommendations. The number one key benefit, I think, is increased communication with your supply chain. It's really understanding what your clients need, what your consumers need, and what the other companies you're working with and in your portfolio are doing to make sure that you're keeping on top of all the changes in technology as well as in the environment. So let's take a moment to look at exactly what the TCFD does recommend here. So as you've seen, these four circles here are the four pillars of the TCFD. So we're looking today at the outer one, governance, and then we'll go into strategy. We also have risk management and metrics and targets. Although we present them separately, it's more important to see them like this image all together. They build on top of each other and they should all be aligned and interlinked. So governance has to, of course, be support the strategy set, which has to align with risk management. It has to be measured with the appropriate metrics and targets. So all of these work holistically. A few key points to note about the recommended disclosures is that the TCFD was not developed to create an additional climate report. It's meant to integrate climate-related information to your current disclosure practices. The good news is you're not expected to create new reports. This is not meant to create a reporting burden, but rather to provide more useful information for investors in your current reporting practices. Another important thing to note is that it does use different time horizons, as I mentioned. So we always want to look at these risks and opportunities on a short term, a medium term, and a long term, but it's up to you to identify those time periods because they should align well with your current financial cycles. So often we see in short term, we might be looking at 2 to 3 years. In medium term, we might be looking at 5 to 10 years, and in long term, we might be looking at 20 to 30 years, but that does vary significantly based on the industry and the company. And we also are using both qualitative and quantitative disclosures. You might see a little bit more quantitative disclosures in the strategy and the metrics and targets component. However, all of these components need to have both quantitative measures so that we can see progress and track our progress over time. But we also have a lot of qualitative disclosures, descriptions, understanding the processes in place, because if we don't have the correct processes, for example, in our governance and in our risk management processes, then we won't be able to ensure that we're seeing all of these risks and opportunities. So a big component there is where you should disclose. As I've mentioned already, the TCFD was not developed in order to create additional reporting burden. So the key point here, and I'll just focus on it momentarily, is that the TCFD is really to help you integrate climate-related information into your existing reporting, not to create a new report or a separate TCFD report. And how it's structured is we have kind of the 4 core pillars at the bottom, which are recommendations. Those 4 pillars that we discussed are strategy, governance, risk management, metrics, and targets. And those lead into 11 recommended disclosures. And then above those 11 recommended disclosures, we have an additional supplemental guidance for 8 sectors, and the banking sector is one of those sectors. So today we'll highlight not only these 11 recommended disclosures that you should be considering, but also the additional disclosures that banks in particular should be taking into consideration. And just to give you an example of what that looks like, so you can see at the top we have governance, strategy, risk management, metrics, and targets. And each one of them have a letter. A is a particular disclosure, B is another disclosure. So governance has 2 disclosure recommendations, and the other 3 pillars each have 3 disclosure recommendations. But for banks, we have additional disclosures in strategy A, in risk management A, and in metrics and targets in A as well. So what that looks like as an example is in strategy A, which is really providing your board oversight, which we'll go into a bit more detail shortly. Banks should also consider characterizing their strategy as material risks and opportunities. And banks should also consider characterizing their climate-related risks in the context of traditional banking industry categories. So credit risk, market risk, liquidity risk, and operational risk. We want to understand how climate impacts all of those traditional banking risks. Now, I'm going to skip through these next few slides, but I encourage you to look through them on your own. This is just so we have enough time later because we started a bit late today. But these next few slides are all looking at how banks are doing so far. So you can use the 2022 status report from the TCFD to look at how banks are doing currently. And then you can also use these other reports, this one from BCG on how banks are doing on TCFD. You'll have links to all of these in the slide deck. This is from that same report. And then another one here from Bain and Company, which also looks at how banks are doing on GHG disclosure. And why to get started. This is a really interesting part of this report, which I highly recommend you read, which looks at, if you get started sooner, you obviously have much more impact in the distant future. But however, if you wait too long, then you risk losing quite a bit of profit by not acting quick enough. So I'll leave those reports with you to review on your own time, and please feel free to ask us questions later about them. But in the interest of time, I'm going to keep moving on to how to get started with TCFD. So first, let's talk about creating a roadmap. We recommend that as all banks get started, they identify a bit of a roadmap, and this is just an illustration of how that might look. So the first stage is often to create an internal working group or a task force, and we highly recommend that group, the TCFD group or the climate group, is stretched throughout the organization to include all the divisions or departments, and that it has a climate champion who sits at the top of the organization. So from the board or the leadership level, to ensure that a correct space and governance is set in place as you move forward. Now, once you set up that internal working group, it's often a next stage of doing a gap analysis, identifying where you're at right now and where you want to go to in the future. So that's where you really start to create that map for your own organization. And in that gap analysis, you might want to use the SSE model guidance on climate disclosure. In Annex 1, we have a checkbox exercise where you can just go through all of the recommended disclosures and identify whether you are or not disclosing this information to the public and to investors. And if you're not, then you start to identify whether or not it is material or it has a financial impact on your organization. And if it does, then you should start to plan how you will be disclosing this information. Now, once you do that gap analysis, you can start to put into place climate governance processes. Then you can work on integrating climate-related information into your operations. And then finally, integrating climate-related information into decision-making processes. And this is another illustration of what a map might look like. This is from Transition Pathway Initiative. You can use this as a tool as you develop your own roadmap. And it just takes you through different levels that you'll want to work on. And it's very similar to the map we just saw, but just identifying specific actions that you can take in each level. So I'll leave that tool with you to make use of. I'll skip this poll as well. And then with that, I'm going to pass on to my colleague, Vanina, who's going to take us through the climate reporting landscape. Sorry, I'm so late, Vanina, over to you.
It's okay. Thanks, Tiffany. I'll try to keep it short, but it's a really important part too, so you get an idea of the climate reporting landscape. So hi, everyone. I'm Vanina Vegetsi, and I'm Tiffany's colleague. So I'm going to present you how the disclosure landscape has been evolving in the recent years. Let's go to the next slide here. So we've already established that climate change is a really important issue for the financial sector to consider and to think through. So we're also seeing that it's accelerating into big changes in the policy regulation and standards. So while TCFD remains a voluntary initiative, market-led initiative, many governments and regulators are taking steps to require or encourage disclosures based on the TCFD recommendations. So you have this map here, and over 120 regulators and governments around the world are TCFD reporters, from Belgium to Japan, New Zealand, and also the UK. However, regulatory authorities are doing much more than supporting the TCFD through their words. Many countries, such as the UK, US, also Japan, have taken steps to mandating climate disclosure or proposing disclosure in line with the TCFD. We can see it here on the map that says there's a real regulatory and policy movement behind the TCFD. This image is already old, and so it's missing some recent updates, but you can find it, the latest updates in the link. No, you can find it in the link in the slides that you will receive if you want more details. And you can also find an update on regulation in this space in the 2022 TCFD status report. So now let's zoom in for the banks. So we have specific requirements for the banking sectors according to the TCFD's guidance for banks. So a bank should look to provide metrics used to assess the impact of transition and financial and physical climate-related risks on their lending and other financial intermediary business activities in the short, medium, and long term. And metrics provided may relate to credit exposure, equity, debt holdings, or trading positions. I also like to highlight here the regulatory shifts we've seen for banks, and here are some requirements we're seeing. So we're seeing mandates for TCFD in many different jurisdictions. Here are some particularly noticeable ones. In the US, for example, we see the the SEC requirements for disclosure, the EU, the Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive, which goes a bit beyond the TCFD, but it's very much aligned with the core pillars and areas of disclosure of the TCFD. And then there's a key area that we'll get into a second is the ISSB standards that you may have heard of. They have been finalized already. And we also are seeing central banks starting to go through stress testing exercises, such as the Bank of England, the Hong Kong Monetary Authority, the Bank of Canada. And this could increasingly start influencing supervisory and regulatory action in the space. Now, an essential part of the regulatory movement is really the aspect of international standardization, which has received a big push due to the work of the IFRS Foundation back in November 2021, when the IFRS Foundation announced the creation of its new International Sustainability Standards Board, typically referred to as the ISSB. Sorry, I think I got lost. Yes. So, and this this International Sustainability Standards Board is tasked with developing a comprehensive and global baseline of high-quality sustainability disclosure standards to meet investors' information needs. And this, the ISSB was announced at COP26. So that's the picture you see here at Glasgow. And it was welcomed by many world leaders around the world. And also to note that the structure of ISSB disclosure requirements are very much aligned with the TCFD. And I will go deeper into this shortly. And you can see, the list of finance minister below the picture. So here we have some aspects would like to highlight of the TCFD and ISSB alignments. In the first instance, just to remind everyone that the ISSB standards stipulate general requirements as well as requirements related to specific themes and industries. The first theme that we've seen is a climate theme coming from the ISSB. We'll see the other sustainability themes coming as well. What we also think is important to highlight here is that based on what has been released so far, that has been released, so the ISSB is consistent with the 4 core pillars and areas of the TCFD, being what Tiffany said, the structure of governance, strategy, risk management, and metrics and targets disclosure, and the specific 11 disclosures within each of those areas for climates. The only area where the TCFD and ISSB climate standards differ is some slight differences in the level of granularity or additional or different language used. But largely, these are very much aligned. So this is a constantly evolving space. And one of the topics that we often get asked about is how nature and biodiversity relate to climate. Maybe you've already seen this acronym of TNFD. So we recently saw the launch of the final version of the TNFD guidelines. And for those who are not familiar, TNFD stands for the Task Force on Nature-Related Financial Disclosures. And the mission of the TNFD is to develop and deliver a risk management and disclosure framework for organizations to report and act on evolving nature-related risks, with the ultimate aim of supporting a shift in global financial flows away from nature negative outcomes and towards nature positive outcomes. The TNFD framework is anchored by the same 4 core pillars of the TCFD approach, and all of the 11 of the TCFD recommended disclosures have been incorporated in the TNFD final draft, providing market participants with a high level of alignment with the structure, language, and approach taken by the TCFD. This should encourage and enable market participants to move towards integrate climate nature disclosures. Like the TCFD, the TNFD is developing a global framework for risk management and disclosure, so not a standard. The final draft draws from and is designed to inform relevant standards, including those from the International Sustainability Standards Board that we've just seen, ISSB, and the Global Reporting Initiative, GRI, both knowledge partners to the TNFD. So feel free to explore this further through the link in the handout here. But the key message here is that TNFD, like for the standards by ISSB, are really much aligned with the TCFD. And TCFD is the base or the starting point. So once you build capacity and enhance the policies and processes already underway in your organization, you can then expand it to nature and to social issues as well, all while understanding that the ESG spectrum is interconnected. So how do all of these frameworks fit together in practice? So this image here is a really useful concept from the IFRS Foundation, which looks at the different frameworks in a building blocks approach. So you have here 3 blocks. We will consider the financial reporting in the center or on the bottom as the foundational first block of information. That's the dark gray box you see here. This is what most companies already report on. Then building on this information is the red box, which helps to put that financial information into a broader context. So really understanding the sustainability related matters that may reasonably create or erode enterprise value, or in other words, have a financial impact on the organization reporting over the short, medium, and long term. Then further building on this block is sustainability reporting, which we often see conducted using the GRI standards that I just mentioned as framework. And this provides the broader context of the impact that an organization has on its surroundings. So the first two boxes or bricks really focus on matters which impact the organization reporting. But the third box, the light gray, helps to create a more holistic picture of the organization's operations by addressing the impact that the organization has on people, environment, and the economy. So that's the surroundings. So what's important to note here is that the first two boxes are directly affected by those people, environment, and economy that are being discussed in the third block through sustainability reporting. So of course, all of these three are interconnected. Another important aspect of this building block approach is to remember that each block builds on the one before. So sustainability-related financial disclosures should address how the sustainability-related matters impact the financial statements. Then, the same when adding the final block, we should understand how people, the environment, and the economy are impacted through the operation that create our financial flows and enterprise value. So this is a very important graphic. So if you have any questions, please, you can ask them. And I think we're reaching the end of my part. This is a question just for you to understand. So the ISSB standards are only relevant for organizations using IFRS. If I'm going to let you a few seconds to think about this, but if you remember what I said, the answer here would be false, because so ISSB standards are relevant for all companies, regardless of the financial reporting standards they are using. As Tiffany said, the material impact of climate change should definitely be a part of the information you are disclosing to ensure your company is prepared, is aware of the risk, and also opportunities that will make your business thrive. So with that, I think we are reaching the break. So we're right on time. You can come back in 5 minutes, and then we'll start with the next part. Thank you for your attention. And again, if you have any questions, feel free to ask them.
Thank you. So hello everyone, welcome back to our training session. Hope you've enjoyed the first part of the session and also got the time to take a break, stretch your legs, and then ready for the second half of our session. Yeah, I'm sorry, can you hear me well?
Yes.
Okay. So the second half of the training session going to be an introduction of the first pillar of TCFD framework. Being cautious of time, I'm also going to keep it short, but also keep the essential message to be delivered. So before I start the first pillar, let me self-introduce myself. I'm Zhongyi and I work with Zhu and also Yan for climate risk and TCFD team of UNEP-FI. And my specific focus is the climate stress test and scenario analysis. And I'm very glad to be able to join this session and introduce to you the session on governance, which is the first pillar of the 4 TCFD pillars. So as a key component and key element of TCFD disclosure, the topic linked to the governance has become very close to our hearts, and it concerns the organization's approach to address climate risks and opportunities, both at board and management level. So this is a little bit of divergence from the traditional corporate governance, which look just at the board level. We often refer to the corporate governance as the pillar that underpins the efficiency and integrity of the company itself. So it is of crucial importance to investors since they want to get context about how the bank embeds climate-related financial risk into its board and operations. And in particular, investors want to see that the proper level of attention is being given by the board and management to factor these issues into their operations. And then moving on to the next slide, the first disclosure requirements in the governance pillar is to describe the role of the board in overseeing climate-related issues. For example, are there particular board committees focusing on the topics or considering it, like the risk and audit committee most often? And what is the role of sustainability or ESG committee? Are these recurring items on their agenda? Or how does the board monitor and oversee the progress against targets for addressing climate-related issues? And how is the board evaluated? And is climate part of the evaluation and remuneration of directors? The second aspect of the disclosure on governance should be the role of management in assessing and managing climate-related issues. We can see here that the TCFD refers to the management quite broadly as any level of senior governance below board level. Here you want to consider how the management and the board exchange information. Often we find that the board and management are not in good communication, unfortunately. And please note that there are not any supplemental guidelines for recommended disclosures, particularly for banks. So banks should focus on these core recommended disclosures from now on. And then if we want to know how the current rate of implementation of TCFD is, we can see that in the 2022 status report, the task force analyzes the current state of disclosure practices, as well as the program's progress made over the past 5 years. The latest report evaluated more than 3,800 organizations that have become supporters of the TCFD recommendations, which shows a steady growth. And these supporters include over 1,500 financial institutions who are responsible for assets of over 217 trillion US dollars. Although, as we can see here, the governance is one of the most regulated issues, and the key backbone of the company, it remains the least disclosed pillar. The two governance recommended disclosures for both oversight and management's role were the second and third least disclosed of Task Force 11 recommended disclosures. And then this is a good example taken from the 2022 climate report by Shoulders, the electricity company. The report effectively outlines the roles and the responsibilities of various departments and working groups involved in addressing climate and nature-related issues. So by using colors and the agenda, readers can easily identify who is responsible for each task. The implementation tip here is that financial institutions should establish clear communication channels between climate risk personnel, the board, and senior management. Following the organizational chart, Shoulders provide further information on each of the forums and working groups. As per TCFD's recommendation, the organization shares details on the chairperson, membership, and the frequency of committee meetings. And additionally, they outline also the group's role and key focus areas. And moving on to the next slide, a good explanation and visualization of the governance is what you see here from the NED bank, which is a South African bank and IFC climate client, in which IFC invested over 200 million to help it expand in green finance operations. Specifically, here there's a climate team, and it shows the delegation of responsibilities to the board committees. The management function outlined here in the organigram helps report readers to understand how climate-related matters are reported to the board, and also how the board oversees the climate-related risk and opportunities. And to whom the climate task team reports in terms of climate risk committee, and then the group executive committee, and going to the group resilience committee as well. All of this helps to paint a holistic picture of how climate-related information is managed within the leadership of the company. Another good example to show is from the Standard Bank, the largest bank by assets based in South Africa. Here it shows the specific roles and responsibilities that different risk committees have. One important area here is the upscaling of leadership of the board. This is really of great importance because it makes sure that the board has the skill and expertise and also continuous training and education on these areas. Please note that the upskilling of board is a key factor as this topic, since the board has to translate the leadership into manageable and understandable language. Here comes to our own program, which is the UNEP FI's Climate Risk and TCFD program, who provides a regional program structure, which allows members to focus on country and regional contexts specific to their needs. We offer varying level of depth and within our own modules, depending on objectives, audience, and budget. For instance, our light version allows individuals to join up to 4 webinars on specific climate topic. We also offer a more detailed engagement that covers multiple topic areas and helps build capacity practically. Additionally, we offer an in-depth program that provides firms with concrete actions to enhance their climate readiness. For example, we worked with the GIZ in Vietnam on a 2-year project in which we developed TCFD guidance and best practices for participant banks. And this slide showcases a case study of a LIGHT regional program that focuses on climate workshops for Eastern Europe with the support of FIM, Finance in Motion. The program involved banks and financial institutions from Eastern Europe and neighboring countries, with 2 sessions covering specific regional climate risks and methodologies for assessing risk within their portfolios. The program objectives were to familiarize participants with climate risks and provide them with access to various resources to explore with their teams. The program's outputs included presentation decks and a guide to open source data resources, providing valuable information and tools to support the participants' climate risk assessment efforts. This slide presents a case study of medium regional program that focuses on exploring the fundamentals of climate risk in MEMA region, which stands for the Middle East, Mediterranean, African region, also with the support from UNDP. The program involved financial institutions and financial supervisors in the region, with 2 sets of 4 sessions covering specific regional climate risks, current regulatory developments, risk assessment techniques, and also resources for climate data. Also, the deep regional program case study was done together with GIZ's support to the State Bank and Vietnamese banks in analyzing climate risks and reporting under TCFD. The program involves several major banks and the Central Bank of Vietnam with an intensive year-long structure consisting of 8 workshops on climate science, risks, regulatory practices, policies, and disclosure guidance. The program aims to enable participants to conduct their own climate risk assessments and issue their first TCFD reports, while providing best practice guidance on climate related risk reporting. The program's output here include presentation decks and a comprehensive report on Vietnam's climate risks and best practices for firms in developing TCFD reports. Here we come to our program's structure, which is Climate Risk Program for the 2023. Here we can see that it is structured around 3 main pillars, each of which focuses on a different aspect of climate risk management. Additionally, there are 2 programs outside of the core program that focus on regional capacity building and thought leadership. For the first pillar, which is content session, we aim to facilitate peer and expert discussion on timely topics related to climate risk management. And for the second pillar, which is capacity building, we focus on providing practical guidance for the implementation of climate risk management. The program also provides peer exchange opportunities for small and large groups, typically conducting 2 or 3 sessions per topic, like the transition planning and TCFD reporting. For the next pillar, the third one for working groups, it is dedicated to creating a practical output and facilitating peer exchange on specific topic. The program deep dives into topics and facilitates discussions among small group of a maximum of 10 firms, conducting 5+ sessions per working group. Examples of working group include the climate stress testing working group. And also outside of the core program, the program is running also regional capacity building, which involves the development and delivery of content for local institutions, including the GIZ Vietnam and FC4S, which stand for Financial Centers of Sustainability of Ireland. The program is also running the 5th content like the thought leadership, which involved producing white papers and guidance in partnership with the other organizations like the CISL Nature Scenarios. So overall, the climate risk program is designed to provide a comprehensive approach to climate risk management, helping financial institutions integrate climate risk considerations into their decision-making progress. So if you want to learn more about our program, please don't hesitate to reach out to us. You can email Leah and also Mahin. We will happy to provide you with a program summary and guide you through the steps to join us. We look forward to hearing from you. So with that being said, the training program run by UNEP FI Climate Change Working Group and also the UNEP FI Training Department offers an online course and in-person workshop on the important issue of climate change. When the course was first held in 2007, the UNEP FI found strong demand amongst financial institutions to learn about climate change and how it affects their industry. So today, with the climate change agenda being even more relevant for financial services, UNEP FI, with the support of CAIF, the Latin American Development Bank, offers the online course on climate change risk opportunities for banking industry. This course prepares banking organizations as leaders to make TCFD responsive assessments, disclosures, and is based on the groundbreaking work of UNEP FI pilot groups on TCFD adaptation. And then last but not least, there's a number of resources from TCFD on governance and learning modules, such as part of the general recommendation, the implementation guides, as well as the additional supporting materials, which keep on being updated every year. It is strongly recommended to review the TCFD resources that should be used when preparing governance information for disclosure. So with that being said, I will hand over to my colleague Tiffany for the introduction of the next slide.
Great, thanks so much. We're a bit short on time, so I'm just going to quickly introduce this to everyone and just let you know that the IFC's climate governance matrix and tip sheet is available. Actually, Lopa, I just saw you turn your camera on. Did you want to speak to the slide briefly?
Yeah, so I mean, if there is interest from the central bank, we can get more deeper into the climate governance methodology. And we've identified touch points based on the IFC's corporate governance methodology, where climate can be further integrated. So the corporate governance methodology is, it has 6 areas that we look at. So one is commitment to corporate governance, second is board structure and functioning, third is control environment, the fourth area that we look at is disclosure transparency, fifth is minority shareholder treatment, and the sixth area is the governance of stakeholder engagement. And this is an updated version. Earlier, we didn't have the governance of stakeholder engagement in the methodology. And I saw that Tiffany has shared the link to the details of the corporate governance methodology and the climate governance methodology as well, which is a recent tip sheets for boards. And there, again, we've incorporated some of the climate-related issues, like how do you demonstrate your leadership to climate, then how the board integrates some of the strategies, the guidance, and oversees climate-related risks, and on control and control environment, the control systems functions and risk governance and detection of climate-related risks. The third is, the fourth area is on disclosure and on material climate risks and opportunities. The fifth one on minority stakeholder treatment is, have they been consulted on climate related action plan? And the sixth one, the last one, is also deals with mapping of climate related impact on not only the organization but also the value chain. Yeah, so over to you, Tiffany, and the details, as my colleague shared, is available on the link.
Great, thanks. And then I think we'll pass over to IFC to continue with strategies. And I think it's Drew, right, that continues now?
Yes.
Great, thanks, Drew. Over to you.
Yeah, thank you, Tiffany. So hi, my name is Drew Johnson. I also work with Zhongyi and Yan at UnipFI, who working on the climate risk and TCFD team. So now I'll walk you through the climate resilience strategies and the third pillar of the TCFD recommendations. Sorry, second pillar. And so basically moving into the next inner ring of the TCFD recommendations, you can see we have strategy. And strategy disclosures are important for showing a firm's understanding of its climate-related exposures in the areas of business, strategy, and financial planning. It fits in as part of its operational resilience strategy in the face of climate change, its planning, and its overall decision-making. So the strategy pillar can provide insights into the type, the magnitude, and the time horizons of current climate-related exposures across the business. So this includes the potential impact of climate risk along with climate-related opportunities, which can arise through new low-carbon technologies, investments, products, and services. It's also important to note that strategy disclosures focus on the need to address how an institution can integrate these risks and opportunities that they identified into their overall strategy and financial planning. So just to move into the pillar itself and this strategy checklist, we have 3 categories. So within this, we have the financially material risks and opportunities, financial impact, and resilience. So the first recommended disclosure focuses on identifying related risks and opportunities through a materiality assessment. Focus on identifying key risks and opportunities across time horizons, geography, and different business units. The second main component is determining the impact of these risks and opportunities on the institution's business strategy, its financial planning, as well as the institution's business as usual. And third and finally, we have the resilience aspect of the strategy pillar. And this focuses on the resilience of the organization's strategy and the use of scenario analysis to identify such resilience under different climate scenarios. So some good practices for these components, including disclosures of the details of the time horizon that's used and providing a justification for different time horizons. It's really important to provide that justification for selecting a certain time horizon or another, and then to link that time horizon explicitly to climate risks. And then it's important to explain the methodologies and processes that are used to identify the risks and opportunities. This includes providing descriptions of the risks and opportunities that are identified, as well as the impacts on different business lines, and providing a description of why different financial metrics and underlying methodologies were used to identify, measure, and prioritize these risks, along with their related impacts. So it's also important that firms disclose how the organizations plan to manage these impacts, as well as linking them to climate impacts to their financial planning processes. Scenario analysis is a very important aspect of the strategy disclosure, and that's something we'll be going into further detail later. But I also note in this pillar that the TCFD provides additional guidance for banks. So they recommend that banks provide information about their credit exposure from related risks and related risks in their lending and intermediary businesses that they may face in those climate-related risks and opportunities. So just briefly, I'll touch on this as I know we're a bit behind, and you can refer to this later. But this is in the most recent TCFD status report that companies are more likely to disclose information on their risks and opportunities. But the other side, we see that strategy C in terms of resilience is a bit further behind in this category. So this is an important reflection on why this might be. So I'll just go forward. You can refer to that later, and I'll just give you a few examples of implementation of the strategy pillar disclosure. So the first one we have here is from Barclays from their TCFD report in 2021, highlighting the different risks and opportunities over different time horizons. You can see in the top right, we have the 3 categories of short term, 0 to 1 year, medium term, 1 to 5 years, and long term, 5 to 30 years. So in addition to this, the report outlines institution support and strategies for a diverse range of clients, including emerging companies, major corporations, and also governments. So while we're going through the risks and opportunities that the TCFD specifically highlights in part 2 of this webinar, I will highlight here that the disclosures use the same terminology as the TCFD to classify the risks. It further identifies then what impact it expects to see from each identified risk. So for example, when addressing physical risk, the bank highlights that acute physical risk can be extreme weather events such as hurricanes, floods, or fires, how they impact credit and market risks, as well as posing a risk for business continuity for the bank itself. So you can see in those first couple bullet points in the table at the top. So this is something you can refer back to, and it's just a good practice example from Barclays. And just to give another example, to give some concrete analysis here, and we can see the second example would be from RBC, a Canadian bank. So this example really shows that RBC is using scenario analysis to identify some of the key physical and transition risks faced by the bank. So this is important as it was used to explore key financial vulnerabilities that they face in their portfolios. So you can see that they have covered physical as well as transition risks, and that they use this information to adjust their future strategies and their priorities to become more resilient to climate change. So one key example for banks to consider is their real estate and mortgage portfolios, specifically looking at different physical hazards, either acute events like hurricanes or chronic damages such as sea level rise. And this is across different time horizons and warming scenarios. So based on these scenarios, RBC plans to improve its processes of robust analysis through more granular assessments and risk identification, impacts to cash flow, as well as changes in property prices as well. So this is naturally an imperfect exercise, as it is not a perfect forecast, but is an exercise that identifies the high-risk assets and makes for more informed strategic planning. And so having briefly gone through that, I'll hand the floor over to my colleague Jan, who will walk you through the scenario analysis aspect of the TCFD recommendations. So thank you. Over to you, Jan.
Thanks. So thanks a lot to my colleague Drew for presenting on the strategy pillar of the TCFD recommendations framework. I will continue today's presentation with a focus on scenario analysis. But before I start, just a quick intro of myself. My name is Hyuyan Chang. I'm originally from Hong Kong, and I'm now based in Zurich. I work alongside my colleagues, Drew and Zhongyi, who presented earlier today at the Climate Risk and TCFD team at the UNEP FI. My work largely revolves around working with banks and data providers for climate risk assessments. So scenario analysis, what is it, and why is it relevant for climate risk assessment and TCFD? Scenarios refer to plausible narrative that describe possible future, and scenario analysis is the practice of using these narratives to sketch out the potential future states of the world. The concept originated in the academic research world in the 1950s, but is now widely used in the corporate world as well as to facilitate climate-related analysis and assessments like climate stress testing. And we'll go through more use cases in the next slide here. So in a sense, through climate scenario analysis, we find out what may happen in terms of physical and transition risks, and then plan our way around it. Like if we want to set a GHG greenhouse gas emission reduction target, and if yes, what should be the base year and target year for tracking my progress? Or if we want to know in a high physical risk scenario where extreme events like floods and droughts are prone, or may be concentrated only in certain specific areas where we might have high exposures of our supply chains in these areas, what do we want to do to mitigate those risks? And hence, you can see that scenario analysis can really help us with internal reporting, climate strategy setting, target setting, that can then inform planning around bolstering the organization's preparedness for the different possible and plausible future scenarios. And through scenario analysis, we can also comply with TCFD or other climate-related disclosures like the ISSB that my colleague just presented earlier. And the TCFD actually recommended that scenario analysis be used in a way to enhance critical strategic thinking for exploring alternatives that may significantly alter the basis for business as usual assumptions. And this ties very closely with the strategy pillar that my colleague Drew just presented, especially around recommended disclosure C under this strategy pillar, which asked for the descriptions about resilience of the reporting organization strategy in terms of considering the different climate-related scenarios and their potential impacts on the business and financial standing of the reporting organizations. But scenario analysis is also key to the risk management pillar of the TCFD framework, which will be presented in tomorrow's session. Another strong and very important common use case for climate scenario analysis is for climate stress testing. Already in many and an increasing number of central banks, climate stress testing is a mix of common macro and microprudential measures. A few examples of central banks that already introduced mandated climate stress testing include the Bank of England, Nederlandsche Bank in the Netherlands, and the European Central Bank. On this slide, you can see how climate scenario analysis actually work. It is, this slide just shows a high-level overview of how climate scenarios are produced. So in a sense, climate scenarios are produced from climate models that are known as integrated assessment models, or the IAMs. So first, these IAMs modelers take some information as input for the model. Such information could include socio-economic drivers like GDP, population growth, and changes in technologies like the developments of renewable technologies and carbon capture and storage technologies, and also climate-related policies such as mandated climate-related disclosures and reporting, and climate target ambitions like net zero targets. Then these climate modelers take those input data and feed them into a model that considers factors such as energy, land, economy, and climate systems, and how they interact with each other to affect the outcome. And then the end results or assessment outputs that IAMs yield can be some indicators on energy use, land use, emissions, investment, and etc. With these outputs, we can analyze the trade-offs between different climate mitigation pathways. And so now we understand that climate risk can be analyzed and modeled through the use of scenarios. And climate scenario analysis can help companies and banks prepare for various potential physical and transition impacts. And although organizations can build their own scenarios for more customized analysis with a bottom-up approach, but a lot of the times global reference scenarios are used in this process. And we will introduce in this session one set of these global reference scenarios, which is called the NGEVA scenarios today. Please note that there are also other global reference scenarios like ones developed by the IPCC, so the RCPs and SSPs, and also those developed by the IEA, which is the International Energy Agency. So the NGFS stands for the Network for Greening the Financial System, which is a group of over 100 central banks across the world that are dedicated to greening the financial system and developing recommendations for central banks' role for combating climate change. The NGFS has come up with this set of scenarios that can be largely summarized by the figure, which you can see on the screen. So you can see 4 scenarios: disorderly, orderly, hothouse, and too little, too late. And please note that the NGFS have already plans for updating their scenarios to make them more granular, but it is worth to still go through the sort of core elements of their scenarios. So the first set of scenarios, disorderly, describes a situation where transition risk, which you can see on the figure, so on the vertical y-axis, which represents transition risk. In this disorderly scenario, transition risk would be high and physical risk, which is on the horizontal x-axis, are low. This is a scenario where climate policies are introduced later or more abruptly, suddenly, and emissions reductions are sharper, and hence this leads to higher transition risk, but also lower physical risk in a sense. And then we can see the next set of scenario, which is orderly scenario that you can see on the bottom left corner. It describes a better situation where we have climate policies that are introduced early enough and implemented gradually rather than suddenly. And with these, transition risk would be lower. And because of the successful policy introduction and implementation, physical risk would then be lower. And then we move on to too little, too late, which is on the top right corner. This describes a situation where we don't do enough to combat climate change. And with this, physical risk would be very high, which prompts the introduction of sudden climate policies, can lead to high transition risk. And then the last set of scenario would be the hothouse, which is on the bottom right corner. It describes a world where the current policies are preserved and the Paris Agreement goals are not met, and hence transition risk would be low, but then emissions would continue to grow until 2080, leading to more than 3 degrees of warming and significant physical risks. You can find out more about how scenarios analysis can be used by navigating yourself through the TCFD hub for these useful resources. There are specific guidance that are listed under the additional supporting materials here on this slide that are relevant specifically for scenario analysis, and you can check it out on the link in the handout. To finish off this part of the session about scenario analysis, we actually have a question, but then I guess for today's setup, we will skip this and go through the interactive exercises that you can navigate yourself to menti.com with the code here. So you can see 4 questions that you can consider to reflect on your progress for how scenario analysis has been used in your organization. And you can also see useful slides earlier, which is these 3 that you can see the implications and assumptions of the different sets of NGFS scenarios that you can use for the interactive exercise. So I will just give participants a few seconds to go to menti.com and use the access code here, 12695421, and see if we can do this interactive exercise.
Thanks, Jan. If anybody in the room is having trouble accessing the Menti, please just let us know. When you do, either hold your camera up to the QR code. It should give you a link that you can go to, or you can just type in your browser www.menti.com, and it will ask you for a code to fill in, and that code is on your screen. It's 12695421. And so then we should be able to get your responses. But we'll pause a minute. If you don't let us know there's a problem, we assume you're just typing some answers in. So we'll give you a minute to type those answers.
So Zubair bhai সবাই কি পারছে এটা করতে, স্ক্যান করতে on their phone?
সবাই পাবে, অসুবিধা নেই।
আচ্ছা। So this is
One,
where you
two,
can use
six,
your
no,
phone.
just a minute. 5421.
Yeah, if you want to use the QR code, you can just use the camera and then point to the QR code here, and I think it will automatically lead you to the
Which
Men
narrative do
People
you
page.
So you don't need to, if you use your camera, you don't need to use the code. So somebody has accessed it, but they've just typed the code in rather than answering the question. So if you use your camera, you'll automatically be given a question on your screen, and you can just answer that question. So the first question is, which narratives? So we just went through the different NGFS scenario narratives. Do you find most plausible in the current scenario set? And maybe Jan, do you want to just go back a few slides to the NGFS, the 4 scenarios there? And then they have it on their screen because they don't have the handout. Great. So we have the disorderly, the too little too late, the orderly, and the hothouse world. Which one do you find to be most plausible? We'll just give you a moment to fill that in. Okay, I've seen 3 people have managed to access it. Maybe I'll share my screen so you can see
Orderly, no?
the answers on the screen. Great. So if a few more want to answer, then Jan can discuss.
So it looks like we have current policies. We have a mix of different answers. Some people are more optimistic, thinking that we will have a more orderly scenario, which is like when climate policies are introduced in time and implemented gradually. But we also have people that believe that we will likely have a hothouse or current policies scenario, which is when the climate policies are introduced late or not at all, or we just keep with what we are doing business as usual in a sense, which will lead to high physical risks. And then we also see people saying that we could expect us to have reducing emissions that will help contribute to lowering our global temperature rise.
Here, for the benefit of the participants, can you explain what you meant by most plausible? Like,
yeah, like most likely.
okay.
What do you think is the most possible future? Do you think that we will have timely policies, or do you think we'll just keep what we're doing? Or there will be policies?
We are speaking to the regulators. If anybody wants to reflect on anything to make it a little more interactive, feel free to do that also.
Yeah, there are no right or wrong answers. It's just what you think is the most possible. And the second question would be, what do you think are the biggest challenges that the 1.5 degrees pathway presents? We can see that sea level rise is a concern here, so more on the chronic physical risk side. Orderly scenario would be the biggest challenge. Interesting.
Yeah, and maybe for the interest of time, I'll keep going just because we're
sure.
a bit short on time here.
Yeah, so the third question would be, how do changes in carbon prices impact emissions, energy mix, transition risk, pace of transition, and other economic activities? So carbon prices would be considered part of climate policies that a lot of regulators might be introducing. Like in Europe, you can see that we have this exchange in terms of companies can exchange their leftover carbon credits And with higher carbon prices, we can expect certain industries, especially the emission-intensive industries, to maybe increase their speed of phasing out, or because that would imply higher carbon prices would then imply higher production costs and operation costs for these certain emissions intensive industries. And it would be interesting to see what people think that would imply for the pace of transition. And we'll just wait a bit for the answers to come in. Yeah, exactly. For sectors, even when we are not just talking about the energy sectors, for manufacturing, there's usage of emissions intensive production procedures. And if the carbon prices are increasing, this would definitely imply higher production costs. And yes, of course, when carbon prices increase, there would be also higher incentive for industries to lower the emissions, because that would then mean that they don't need to pay as much for the carbon price. Maybe we could move on to the next. Yeah, great. So the last question would be, what scenario is not in the NGFS scenario set that you would like to see? So are you more optimistic or a little bit more pessimistic? We'll just give a few seconds for the answers to come in. Yeah, definitely. We don't want to see the climate tipping point where irreversible and yet very plausible futures where irreversible changes to the environment that we're living in would occur. That's logical. Yeah, we're not sure. There's always a level of uncertainty in terms of how the future may unfold. Hothouse scenario. Yeah, we can see that people are not that optimistic about what the future might look like, which gives us a lot of incentive to work on, what we are financing and what kind of projects we're financing. Perhaps we want to switch our focus to more to help the transition towards a low carbon economy.
Great. Yeah. And I think we might move on because we're short on time now, but thanks so much. So the idea really here is to really think through what those scenarios can be used for, and that they're not the only scenarios, of course. So we're continually getting more and more scenarios, and the UNEP-FI team has a number of resources you can use. So they recently launched a toolbook or an updated toolbook where you can get a number of different tools that you can use now on your journey. I'm going to go really quickly through these resources so that we have time in case there's any questions in the room. But please look through these when you have time in the handout. We recommend, of course, looking at the TCFD's recommendations themselves, but then we also have the SSE model guidance on climate disclosure that can help you as you're moving forward. And of course, the TCFD Knowledge Hub, where you can find all of the resources you're going to need on this topic. We also flagged previously some of the work of the IFC and the Beyond the Balance Sheet work. We put in a slide here too, and really recommend making use of the resources that they've developed and the really broad library of information that you can get through the IFC's sustainability page. Also, I'm just going to try to, there we go. Also, of course, oops, I went too far. Also, of course, when you are looking at scenarios in particular, and we do recommend taking a look through the NGFS scenarios on their website. You can go to ngfs.net and you can start to even just playing around with how temperature changes might happen in the different scenarios, different physical risks, transition risks that you might see. A lot of really great information there. Great. Also, UNFFI, as we mentioned, has a number of resources you can use. So you can check out their website and get all of their resources there. Sorry, I went a bit quick there, but please do make use of their recent tools, which we have in a moment here as well. We also share a few documents that might be helpful from different banks, both private and public, to see how they're tackling these issues that you can make use of. And this is the tool from UNFFI. I mentioned their climate risk landscape report, which comes also with an Excel spreadsheet full of different tools and how you can use them as you're starting to move forward on analyzing the risk landscape for your bank. Now, with that, we have only 4 minutes till we close, but I did want to make sure we had a little bit of time in case there's any questions in the room. So if you do have any questions, since we have already the majority of you as panelists, you can just unmute. We can't see you right now. I think your camera's turned off. But if you would like to ask a question, go ahead. And if anybody who's not in the room, who's a participant has a question, you can raise your hand and we'll answer that question. In the meantime, I'll just let you know about the CPD certificate while you figure out if you have some questions. So if you would like to get a certificate, we certified the course and it's a full 4 CPD credits because it's 4 hours together. So for today, you'll get a credit of 2 hours. So if you fill out the survey from today's session, we will give you a certificate of completion with 2 CPD credits, and then we'll do the same thing tomorrow. So please remember you have to fill out 2 surveys and you'll get 2 certificates for each session. This link is a Google form. So if you're not able to access Google Suite in your organization, you might want to do it on your mobile device to be able to access that. And we'll make sure that the organizers provide you with that link. Oops, so I'll come back here and just check if we had any questions before we close out. Well, it looks like not. So I hope that means that everything was very clear.
Thank you, Stephanie. We
Yeah.
are now going through the papers and the presentations, and I hope that the questions, it will be better to face the questions tomorrow, because so that we can have the concrete questions and what will be very much related to issuing our next steps. So today we have gone through the presentations, and also from your experience, we will, if we have our questions, we will ask it in tomorrow.
Okay, and also feel free to email us if you'd like if any questions come up. If you'd like to email us before the session tomorrow, we can make sure that we address all of your questions during the session tomorrow.
Tiffany, for tomorrow, would you like me to share the presentations for tomorrow so that everyone is prepared with questions?
Sure.
So I'll email the presentations for today and tomorrow as well. So I know that there were some questions on the standards. So if you have like specific questions on how they can be built for country specific, please feel free to ask the presenters, because they do have a lot of experience working in global markets. Yeah.
Great. Well, we look forward to seeing you all tomorrow then. Thank you so much for all of our facilitators today for joining us, and of course to our hosts. And thank you, Lopa, for all the hard work in bringing this training to them. So we'll see you tomorrow, and we look forward to another session and continuation of this training tomorrow. Take care, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Tiffany. Thank you, everyone. Thank you.
Market institution.